Game Boy Advance was a very popular system back in the early 2000s. It wasn't quite as successful as the original Game Boy, but it was a crucial device that practically carried Nintendo all throughout the 6th generation of gaming. The GameCube wasn't doing all too well sales-wise, so most of the company's remaining audience were playing their Game Boy Advances. I think because of this, Nintendo went all out with porting and remastering a bunch of their classic games on the Advance to cash in on existing fans' nostalgia. Like really, they went a little crazy with the ports, to the point where there wasn't a single original traditional Mario platformer released on the system. After Metroid Fusion proved to be another critical success, the Metroid dev team decided it would be a good idea to make a port of either the original game or Super Metroid. Ultimately, they landed on the ports of Metroid 1 as being the best choice, and this project initially began with the intention of making as faithful of a recreation as possible. But throughout its production, it morphed into something that was still staying true to the roots of the first game, but was now adding enough new twists and changes to be its own separate thing. What came out of it was a game that some argue is the pinnacle of 2D Metroid. This is Metroid Zero Mission. Zero Mission was shaping out to be a dramatically improved version of Metroid 1. It was using a slightly modified version of the Metroid Fusion gameplay and graphics engine, and was not only going to remix the locales and bosses of the original, but also add completely new ones. When it comes to remakes of older games, there's two obvious types. Those that really just take the base of the old game and spruce it up with enhanced visuals, maybe some added quality of life features, and there's those that go all out, where the developers practically make a whole new game and really only carry over story beats and characters. Metroid Zero Mission falls in the second of these two camps. But it goes even a step further than your Resident Evil 2s and FF7 remakes. Those two don't really replace the originals. Those classics still have their own appeal and haven't fallen victim to the sands of time. With Zero Mission and Metroid 1 though, the former effectively replaces the latter, and I don't think that's an unpopular take. It's no contest, people. Zero Mission is an improvement in every conceivable way and is the definitive and only way that you should experience the first game in the series. I mean, you can even unlock the NES original once you complete the game. And oh god, I can just imagine the reactions of those who started with Zero Mission and checked out the original immediately after, only to be greeted with the clunky artifact of the last century. The Virgin Metroid NES versus the Chad Metroid Zero Mission. I know I pretty much gave away my summed up thoughts on the game just now, but stick around. This is obviously the superior version, but it's more complicated than that, and deserves to be looked at more thoroughly. Zero Mission initially dropped in 2004, the same year as Metroid Prime 2. Oh, how times have changed. Much like Super Metroid and Fusion, I first beat Zero Mission when it landed on the Wii U. Unlike those other two though, this was my first time playing the game at all. I knew of its existence of course, but I don't know, maybe because I knew it was a remake and not a new entry in the story, I didn't feel as compelled to immediately give it a shot when I found out about it. Nevertheless, it really hooked me when I did eventually give it a chance. I used to play the hell out of this game. I was already sort of leaving my Super Metroid addiction at this time, and I think after a number of playthroughs of Zero Mission is when my Metroid high was officially over, and I went back to giving other series an equal amount of attention. Didn't stop me from spending a shit ton of time on the Prime Trilogy when it was put on the eShop in 2016, but that's a story for another time. There's not much to say in terms of the plot of Zero Mission since this is a remake of an old game after all. For the most part, it's the same song and dance as last time. Samus has been ordered by the Galactic Federation to investigate space pirate activity on planet Zebes. This faction of mercenaries that may as well be humanoid lobsters are hell-bent on using creatures called Metroids as bioweapons to take over the galaxy. They are led by an organic supercomputer known as Mother Brain, who has tasked her two commanders Ridley and Kraid to ensure that Samus doesn't foil their plans. Yeah, that doesn't really work out. But, in an added twist for Zero Mission, the game doesn't end after Samus destroys Mother Brain. On her way out of Zebes, she's attacked by a group of space pirates that force her to make a crash landing. With her equipment gone, Samus must make her way through the space pirate mothership to find a way off the planet, and also survive the newly fortified Chizodia, which was once a temple area inhabited by the Chozo on Zebes several years ago. After passing a ritualistic test in some ruins, Samus regains her lost upgrades yet again. She runs into a robotic version of Ridley, proceeds to show it who's boss, and finally manages to escape. So yeah, that's Zero Mission's story in a nutshell. The story's presentation has been overhauled for the better. You now get short and sweet cutscenes showcasing various things like Ridley landing on Zebes after you defeat Kraid, and an eerie introduction to the Metroid threat. These serve to make the game feel a bit more cinematic. They have a really nice art style that looks straight out of a manga, probably because Zero Mission took a cue from the Japanese-only end screens of Fusion and spliced elements from the Metroid manga into the game. These books were obviously an artistic and narrative inspiration for the remake, which I quite like. And unlike Fusion, I don't think these scenes are intrusive. They're very quick, and other than the opening and the beginning of the Chizodia section, there's no dialogue to be found. Good job, Zero Mission. In fact, if there's one word that I'd use to describe Zero Mission in its entirety, it's quick. Think of the gameplay as a marriage of the simplified controls of Fusion and the more complex movement and tricks of Super Metroid, while also dialing up Samus' speed a bit. Just by jumping for the first time, the faster movement of the game becomes readily apparent. She drops like a damn rock if I'm being honest, and if you're used to how her jumps felt in the previous games, it could be a little off-putting. It even took me a while to readjust after replaying the previous two games. But once you do get used to it, I'd argue this is the best control you will find in any of the official 2D games. And this is coming from someone who loves how Samus handles in Super Metroid. Running, shooting, and platforming all feel really responsive. The wall jump is back to how it was in Metroid 3, so you're able to just use one wall to ascend. Though because of how quickly Samus moves this time around, the wall jump is more tricky to pull off than ever before. The window to perform it is very strict, though this isn't such a big deal because I feel more emphasis was placed on the bomb jump. Bombs detonate quicker than before, and the timing required to gain height is a lot simpler to memorize. Now, why am I immediately going over two advanced movement options that the game doesn't even require you to execute? It's because Zero Mission was intentionally made to appeal to advanced players and speedrunners. There was the crazy tech in Super Metroid 10 years earlier, of course, but it's debatable as to whether most of those were actually caught by the developers. A lot of them felt very hacky and glitchy in their nature, you know? But the amount of sequence breaking found in Zero Mission was purposefully put into the game. The level designers added in a bunch of hidden, optional alternate routes that allow you to bypass various items and bosses that a first-time player may think are mandatory to beat the game. Even back then, there was probably a bit of backlash that Fusion went for a more linear approach with not a lot of room to go off the beaten path. Sakamoto and his team probably took those criticisms into account when making Zero Mission, resulting in the most open-ended Metroid game that Nintendo has ever released. And I love it so much for that reason. Well, for multiple reasons really. But the fact that I know I'm allowed to try new shit each time I come back to the game is great for replay value, and it's how I personally want my Metroid games to be. I'll probably never be skilled enough to do something like a 9% run, which is the absolute minimum item percentage you can get when you reach the credits. I'm no professional speedrunner. This is someone who has put thousands of hours into Metroid games, and this is me. But I like having the option to skip certain bosses if I want to, or choose to ignore certain items like the Varia suit. Not the long beam though, I'll never ignore that item. Yeah, since this is a remake of the first game, it's understandable that Samus begins the game from square one, meaning that her beam starts off with its measly range of 10 pixels. You've got all the classic power-ups from Metroid 1 making a comeback, but the developers have also added several upgrades that were introduced in the games that were released after the NES original. This includes the charge beam, which isn't as broken as in Fusion but is still pretty useful. You can find the power grip, the speed booster is back along with the sexy shine spark, which this game has even more of a fetish for than Fusion, more on that later. Super missiles are back to being separate types of missiles that need to be selected, and you'll find these unknown items along your journey that won't unlock until endgame after you complete the Chozo Shrine test. These include the Plasma Beam, Gravity Suit, and Space Jump, and soon after you will find Power Bombs in what is likely their most useless incarnation in the 2D games. Yeah, they're still powerful, but you get them so late in the game. The count maxes out at 18, and their main use is basically just to find more item expansions, which was essentially their main function in Fusion 2, but at least you didn't get them in the final area. Regardless, the power-ups are just as enjoyable as in the other Metroid games, though you may be thinking, well shit, with all these items that weren't originally in Metroid 1, that must mean that the game is pretty easy. And yeah, you wouldn't be wrong to think that honestly. I'll just get this out of the way now. Zero Mission is the perfect place to start if you want to get into the Metroid series. It's not only convenient that its story is the first in the chronological timeline, but it's also very short and nowhere near as challenging as Fusion, Super Metroid, Metroid 2, and definitely not as much as the NES version. There's a lot of factors that make Zero Mission the most accessible 2D Metroid game to date. There's of course the addition of all these amazing power-ups to ensure that the player never feels weak or at a disadvantage against the various enemies lurking around. The statues serve a similar gameplay purpose as Adam from last time, only without the need to drop a whole paragraph of text for you to read before continuing. They also fully restore your weapon ammunition and health. And just as another example of how mindful the people who made this game were towards series veterans, most of the time there are ways to just straight up skip these altogether. Unlike Fusion, which had those unfortunate Metroid moments as Video Game Donkey coined them, to my knowledge, not counting optional collectibles, Zero Mission doesn't require you to bomb some seemingly random tile or do any other kind of counterintuitive thing to get to your destination. Bosses offer next to no challenge anymore. They all go down incredibly easily. It's kinda sad really. Ridley is even more of a pushover than in Fusion. Mother Brain has an attack now, I guess, but she's still easier than she was in the original. All of these new mini-bosses are laughable. Robo Ridley is only a bit dangerous if you go for 100% since his health and damage output scales with the more items you collect throughout the game. But honestly, he's still not hard at all. And it helps that since this remake was built from the ground up, the copy and paste syndrome of the original has been nuked out of existence. Environments are distinct enough so that no two rooms are literally the exact same. As a whole, the visuals are no longer so generic. Lots of beautiful art has replaced the pitch black backgrounds of old. Samus's proportions are those of an actual human. Kraid no longer looks like a gremlin. The architecture and terrain is now very Super Metroid-esque, which gives each area its own unique look. I love the animations, especially Samus's jump that now leaves these really slick looking after images of her. As for the music though, it's remarkable, no question about it. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that Zero Mission has the best Metroid soundtrack, period. Minako Hamano and Kenji Yamamoto were having a field day in the studio, because these new arrangements sound so fucking upbeat, catchy, bombastic, they're simply incredible. Like you listen to the Brinstar theme in the original, and then play the Zero Mission version and Zero Mission's OST is insanely good and memorable, and I look forward to bopping along with these tunes each time I replay the game. Every area has its signature song from the NES game, and speaking of areas, they're all back and better than ever thanks to the improved level design. Brinstar is a fantastic opening level. Norfair took notes from its Super Metroid counterpart, and now has ultra hot sub-areas that require the Various suit to get through without taking damage. Kraid and Ridley's lairs are actually fun to explore now, especially Kraid's, if only for the fact that I can now say fuck you to this incredibly annoying section from the original, where you had to slowly shoot these blocks and wait for them to rematerialize to make your way to the top. Now with the speed booster you get from defeating Kraid, Turian now acts as the second to last level you play through. It's got the returning turrets and death bagels, as well as the returning Metroids that I'm really a fan of in Zero Mission, if only for that awesome animation of them entering the foreground. The remake adds criteria from Super Metroid, once again acting as Samus's ship's landing site, and is also the connecting tissue between the main part of Zebes and the aforementioned brand new region, Chizodia. I really love the concept behind Chizodia. All these outdoor and indoor ruins of a Chozo temple that have been converted into an intimidating space pirate base that you're forced to traverse through when you're at your weakest. This is a love it or hate it section of the game. I'm personally a fan of this stealth segment, where you're stripped of all of your power-ups and only have your stun pistol to defend yourself. It doesn't last too long and it's legitimately intense when you get spotted and have to run away. An extension of the SAX chase segments from Fusion. And not counting the New Game Plus of the NES game or when you input the Justin Bailey code in the password screen, Zero Mission is the first Metroid game that lets you control Samus out of her power suit. It's also the introduction of the iconic blue Zero suit. This is also Zero Mission's way of adding space pirates as enemies in Metroid 1, though I'm sad to report that they no longer perform martial arts. There's no way I can praise these revamped areas enough. They're simultaneously familiar yet fresh, which is saying a lot since this is now the third time that the series has taken place on planet Zebes. To keep making new games that take place in the exact same locations and not make them feel repetitive is a huge achievement. But this wouldn't be a Metroid review from me that isn't of Super Metroid if I didn't have a few things to complain about. And for the most part, there aren't any. I don't see any glaring flaws in Zero Mission that would prevent me from recommending this game to people. However, and I alluded to this back in the Fusion video, if there is one thing that irks the hell out of me in Zero Mission, it's the process of going for 100%. I explained what going for 100% in Metroid games means to me in the last video, so I won't focus much on that aspect here. But the design choice to save a good amount of the collectibles for the post-game is one that I find to be even more egregious in Zero Mission than in Fusion. There's no BS where you could potentially screw yourself out of getting all items by accidentally walking into a navigation room or something like that anymore, but it's as if the game actively discourages you from going out of your way to get every item. For one, by the time you have every upgrade required to complete the cleanup, there is no shit only about 8 minutes left in the game. Robo Ridley is just right around the corner, taunting you. But if you want to get 100%, you have to revisit every single area for the items that used to be inaccessible. In some cases, like in Kraid's lair, there may just be one fucking item that you couldn't get the first time, so now you have to waste time to go back and get it. And just like in Fusion, a lot of these items are tricky to obtain, requiring you to do an ass load of Shine Spark manipulation, which includes a new move where you can do a Morph Ball Shine Spark, but quickly loses its luster when you're repeatedly messing up a bunch of very tight Shine Sparks that I won't hesitate in labeling as trial and error. There's just so much backtracking. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous the lengths you have to go to just be able to say that you fully completed Zero Mission. And as an extra punch in the gut, as I talked about earlier, Robo Ridley actually gets harder if you got a bunch of items. What kind of shit is that? Are you trying to discourage people who are just trying to get most out of what is otherwise an excellent action-adventure game that they were likely having a blast with before they were forced to comb through every nook and cranny for completion? And what the hell is up with this final total? 250 missiles, 30 super missiles, 18 power bombs? Why not a round number like 20 or 15? That's way more fulfilling and actually feels like you got everything. Would it have been so hard to just include one more powerbomb tank? Seriously, this and Fusion's max powerbomb count can die in a hole. This is the reason why I have bags under my eyes. Thanks, Nintendo. The fact that the end of the game is so close looms in the back of your mind throughout this entire process. The fast-paced nature of the gameplay can't save the slog that is the cleanup. It's for this reason that Zero Mission is one of only 3 of the Metroid games that I have played that I don't bother 100%ing. As much of a completionist whore as I am when it comes to Nintendo games, especially Metroid, it's not worth it. But again, it's not a deal breaker. The game is still magnificent. In so many ways, Zero Mission is as pure of a Metroidvania as a Metroidvania can be. It introduces so many improvements and changes to the Metroid formula and completely blows the original game out of the water. Gameplay is responsive, visuals are great, music is phenomenal, the game appeals to both casual and hardcore fans alike through its smart level design and difficulty settings. It is very replayable, having a plethora of different ending screens like Fusion. A lot of people claim that this is the best Metroid game ever made, and I really have no issue with that conclusion. If it weren't for my attachment to Super Metroid and my vendetta against Zero Mission's postgame, I would also probably feel inclined to call this my favorite Metroid game. Objectively speaking, it very well may be, but this series is about my own thoughts on the games, so it isn't quite my favorite 2D Metroid, but I'd be an idiot not to admit that it's still a fan-fucking-tastic video game regardless. Please play the game if you get the chance. It is worth every penny unless it's from a scalper, in which case fuck scalpers. Try to look for a better deal elsewhere or get it on the Wii U Virtual Console for the 2 of you out there who still have a Wii U. This review is going to be one of the shorter ones in the Road to Metroid Dread Marathon. Frankly, there's not much left to say. Zero Mission is just a very solid, simple, fun Metroid game. As for next time and the time after that, we've got another remake on our hands. AM2R: Return of Samus. If you don't keep up with Metroid content much, you may be wondering why the title looks like an anagram of ASMR and the subtitle is identical to Metroid 2's subtitle. Well, keep an eye on my channel if you want to hear my thoughts on one of the most interesting pieces of Metroid history. Until then, stay safe, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.